Hello, lovely people. We are creeping in on spooky season and I could not be more excited. Do I like summer? It's okay. Do I love fall? Yes, absolutely. It's my favorite season and it means we get to read all of the spooky things. I mean, I read them all throughout the year anyway, but it's like a special time of year for me. So today I have a video for you guys with book recommendations for various like subgenres, as well as a TBR of books that I want to read that are spooky. And let's just dive in. First, we're starting with witches, which I have noticed has become like all the rage. There have been like romantic comedy kinds of books written about witches, and I kind of love to see that subgenre breaking out into other genres as well. It's not just horror anymore. I've got one recommendation for you, as well as two books on my TBR for September, October. The first recommendation is The Familiars by Stacey Halls. This book is historical fiction and really looks at witches from that viewpoint. It takes place in the 1600s, 1612, Pendle Hill in England. And we follow a young woman named Fleetwood. She is a bit of a wealthy woman. She is with child. Now, she's been with child before, but she has lost all of her pregnancies and she's terrified that she's going to lose this one. Her doctor thinks she'll lose it. Her husband thinks she'll lose it, and she's just determined to try and save this particular child. So she goes to a woman named Alice, who is a midwife, and Alice promises her that if she works with Alice, Fleetwood will absolutely have a healthy baby. And so Fleetwood trusts this woman. And soon after trusting her, Alice is accused of being a witch, and she is locked up, put away, and these women's lives become intertwined. They are both at risk of losing their own lives. It was such a good book. This was the first Stacey Halls book that I've read. I've read all of her stuff now. I adore her writing. She writes such interesting women in very precarious situations in history. And of course, being accused of being a witch or being related in any way, shape, or form with a witch would absolutely put you at risk in 1612. One book that I really want to read this spooky season is Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. I believe this is going to be a series. I don't know if the second one is out or coming out this year. I haven't heard anything about that. But this just sounds like such a feminist take on witches. Of course, that's usually there's a feminist take, but this is just particularly feminist. This follows 4 young girls as they are inducted into Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which is established by Queen Elizabeth I. We follow them over decades. The coven has kind of fallen apart. Many of the members of those 4 members aren't really talking anymore. They have been through so much together. And when a warlock threatens Her Majesty's Royal Coven, I think they have to come back together again. I've only heard good things about this book, and that makes me want to read this so badly. I need to read this little quote to you to tell you just how interesting it really is. If you look hard enough at old photographs, we're there in the background, healers in the trenches, suffragettes, Bletchley Park oracles, land girls, and resistance fighters. Why is it we help in times of crisis? We have a gift. We are stronger than mundanes, plain and simple. Like, I have chills reading that. I'm so excited. One book that my friend Stacey gave me for my birthday is Witches, Midwives, and Nurses. This is a tiny little thing, and it looks at the historical way that society dealt with women who were simply midwives or nurses or just trying to help usually other women. They treated them like they were witches, that they were the outcast, that they shouldn't have any power because women shouldn't have any power. And I'm so interested in learning a little bit more about that. It's a very short book. First published in 1973, and I just think it sounds great. So I'm planning on reading that this year as well. This should be easy to read. Like, I think I could sit down and just plow through this in a morning and afternoon. Moving on to serial killers. I love reading a good serial killer book. They are creepy. They exist in the real world, and the concept of having your life path crossed by a serial killer truly is terrifying. So I've got a couple of books I want to recommend to you, and then a couple of books I'd like to put on my TBR. So the first book I want to recommend to you is The Nothing Man by Catherine Ryan Howard. Now, I've heard a couple of you guys mention that you've read a Catherine Ryan Howard before, you didn't really get on with it, and you were about to like not read her again. I would suggest reading this before you fully cut her out. I read a book recently, this Distant Signals or something along those lines, and I didn't really love it, but I absolutely adored this book. It is creepy in the best of ways. This follows a young girl, Eve Black. When she was 12, she was the only survivor of this serial killer who killed her entire family. Again, only survivor. She goes on to grow up and write The Nothing Man. She writes a bit of a memoir, if you will, of her experience with this man. And so you follow her and you know, really not being able to move on in her life because he was never caught. And then you follow the Nothing Man himself. You follow supermarket security guard Jim Doyle, who is working a shift at the supermarket and walks by a book called The Nothing Man and picks it up and starts like just reading a little bit about it and realizes this is a book about him. And he is the serial killer mentioned in this book. This apparently was inspired by Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and the Golden State Killer, and the concept of the Golden State Killer reading I'll Be Gone in the Dark because he was only caught after that was published. And just like the audacity almost of reading something like that, and just how strange it would be to do that. In any case, this was gripping. I really do enjoy reading from the perspective of a diabolical mind, and that had that in here in spades. Moving on to another book that is very similar in some ways. This is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. I have been raving about this book because it is truly the best thriller that I've read this year. This follows a woman named Emma. She lives on her own in isolation. She does have a golden retriever who is lovely in this book. The only people around her is a distant neighbor that she can see, and she kind of waves at him every once in a while. They don't have like a pretty, you know, neighborly relationship. She also emails the landlord because she doesn't own this cabin that she's living in. She's kind of house sitting essentially, but otherwise she just wants to be left alone. There's stuff from her past that is kind of trickled in here. You get little snippets of it here and there that has truly traumatized her, and she needs to be alone and just to work through stuff on her own. She spends her time reading Kindle books, essentially. I think she's got a Kindle Unlimited account and she's just plowing through, and she's recently read a horror book that she thought was the stupidest thing in the entire world. She leaves a terrible review because it was terrible, and the author responds to her and basically starts fighting with her. and she refuses to take down her review, even though he's requested that. And it's this awkward thing. She kind of thinks that that's that. It was just this weird interaction with an angry author. And then things start happening at the cabin that she can't explain that are super creepy. This has breaking and entering in here. You also read from the author's perspective in this book, which is hilarious. You'll get like one scene written from Emma's perspective of what's happening, and then another scene written by this author. And those sections, I was literally smiling. Like, I could tell Taylor Adams was just having such a great time. But don't be mistaken, this is actually quite scary at times. I was nervous reading this book, and I loved it, and I hope you will too. I have 2 books that I'd like to read based on serial killers. The first has been on my shelves forever. It has been on my TBR forever, and that is Intensity by Dean Koontz. So this book is about a woman who is going to stay with one of her best friends, and someone breaks into the house and she is trying to survive him. She also learns the identity of his next victim, and she's trying to save that person as well. She is dealing with a man named Edgar Foreman Vess, and he is a self-proclaimed homicidal adventurer and wants to murder everybody in the house, including China. It sounds great. Why haven't I read this yet? Oh dear. And then I think you guys will be excited to see, I've got the new Jessica Knoll book. Simon & Schuster Canada sent this my way. Thank you again, guys. I'm so excited to read this. Bright Young Women. Sounds a lot actually like Promising Young Women. I think that's what it was called, if I'm not mistaken, that movie, which I loved. This takes place in January 1978. There is a serial killer wreaking havoc in the Pacific Northwest, and we follow a woman on the Florida State University campus, Pamela. She is aware of this story and aware that there is a killer out there, but she's really not all that worried about it. She's safe at home in her sorority until one night she hears something outside of her door, and she goes to inspect and finds 2 of her sorority sisters dead, and she knows that there is a killer nearby. You also follow a woman across the country, Tina Cannon, who is living in Seattle after years of a lot of hardship. She has been brought together by this hardship with another woman named Ruth, and Ruth suddenly goes missing. And so I think what ends up happening is Tina and Pamela's lives intersect in some way or another. I'm assuming by the serial killer. I don't know, but I definitely want to read this. It gives, well, serial killer vibes and also back to school vibes in the worst/best way possible. So I want to read that. Moving on to vampires now. I've got my favorite horror book of all time to recommend to you. If you haven't read the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, what are you doing with your life? My favorite of all time. I love Grady Hendrix. This follows a group of women in the 90s, I want to say, maybe late 80s, 90s. We follow Patricia in particular, and this group of women have a book club together, but it is a true crime book club. And most recently, a man has moved into their neighborhood, and Patricia believes he's a vampire. He also really infiltrates himself into their lives. Like at one point he joins the book club, and Patricia's not for that. In any case, it is really about these women fighting a vampire in their neighborhood. It has absolutely humorous elements to it, but it also speaks to misogyny. It speaks to racism here because this vampire preys upon Black children a lot of the time. because he knows that the police are not going to be as interested in a black missing child as opposed to a white missing child, which is totally immoral in any case. It has so much depth to it. It is also gruesome at times and scary beyond belief at times. There is a roof scene. I just will never get that out of my mind. There is an attic scene that is creepy, crawly grossness. Such a good book. Highly recommend. And I'm interested in reading, I'm not sure if it's considered a classic, but I actually watched the movie version of this. Didn't know that it was a book at the time. This is Let the Right One In. And this is about two kids, essentially, living in an apartment complex. This little boy, Oscar, is, I think, being bullied and just not having a great time of it. There has recently been a murder in the neighborhood that he's become quite obsessed with. And then a little girl moves in next door, and she's strange and she only comes out at night, and essentially she's a vampire. I absolutely need to read this. Why haven't I read it yet? Let me know if you guys have read that one, because I feel like a lot of people have. And last but not least, probably my favorite spooky genre of all time, Hauntings. I just love them. I have one recommendation for you that will terrify you. It genuinely will terrify you. This is the first Darcy Coates I've ever read. Not the last. I've read many by her since, but The Haunting of Ashbourne House is by far the scariest one that I've read thus far. This is about a woman named Adrian who is down on her luck and inherits a crumbling house at the very time that she needs a place to stay. Unfortunately for her, it is haunted. There is a ghost that haunts the grounds of Ashbourne House. It is terrifying. There are instructions within the house of how to keep the ghost at bay, but she doesn't always follow instructions very well. It truly was scary. Like, I will never get this out of my head. I wish that I could read this again for the first time because I was just so creeped out. I highly recommend that one. And then I've got two books that I would like to read this spooky season. This is Horror Store. This is Grady Hendrix. And it's basically a haunted house story that takes place in something like an IKEA. It is set up like an IKEA catalog. Do they even make those anymore? They probably do. And I'm here for it. I think it follows a group of employees that decide to stay overnight in this haunted space, and they're trying to deal with how terrifying it is there. I'm here for it. And last but not least is theme music. I've been hearing a lot of buzz about this one on TikTok. Strangely enough, I guess Book Talk. Theme music follows a young woman when she was a baby, like 1 year old. Her father murders her entire family except for her. He kills himself. She's the only survivor. Now, years later, the house that horrible, murder happened in goes up for sale, and she buys it. She's curious and moves in, and it's haunted. Not a good plan, but here we are. And it sounds creepy, and I really like this cover. Creepy. So those are all of the books that I wanted to recommend and also read for this spooky season. Are you excited to be reading terrifying books at this time of year? What do you like to read? Are there like subgenres? I had like 4 or 5 here. Are there some that you tend to gravitate more to than others? I'd love to know. Also, list your recommendations down below for other people. I'm sure everybody will want to be checking the comments for that. And I will see you very soon. Bye, guys.